They called it the atomic age, not for bombs, but for promise. Imagine America in 1953, standing at the edge of tomorrow. President Eisenhower at the United Nations, his voice steady, speaking of atoms, not for war, but for peace. Small towns like Shippingport, Pennsylvania, became monuments to hope. Engineers in white coats, children playing in yards near the first commercial nuclear plant in the world. Clean energy was not a dream. It was our destiny. Until someone changed the story. There was magic in the air across America during the 1950s. Not the kind you found in fairy tales, but the kind born from science, ambition, and an unwavering belief that tomorrow would be better than today. Families were moving to the suburbs, building lives around white picket fences and station wagons. Kids rode their bikes until the streetlights came on. Mothers baked casseroles while fathers came home from jobs that promised pensions and security. But underneath all that everyday normalcy, something extraordinary was brewing, something that would change the very fabric of American life. December 8, 1953. President Dwight Eisenhower stood before the United Nations General Assembly. This was a man who had seen war, who understood the terrible power of the atom firsthand. Yet he stood there that winter day and spoke with hope rather than fear. He called his vision Atoms for Peace. The idea was simple, yet revolutionary. Take the same science that had ended World War II and transform it into something that would heal the world rather than destroy it. Abundant electricity for everyone, energy so plentiful, so cheap, that it would lift entire nations out of poverty. The atom would no longer be a weapon. It would be a gift. Can you imagine the hope that surged through American hearts that day? This was not some distant fantasy. Scientists had already proven it worked. The first reactor had generated electricity back in December 1951 in Idaho. Small scale, experimental, but real. By 1953, nuclear submarines were gliding silently through the depths of the ocean, powered by reactors smaller than a living room. If it could power a submarine, surely it could power a city. The technology was ready. America was ready. All they needed was someone brave enough to build it. Enter Shippingport, Pennsylvania, a small community along the Ohio River, about 25 miles from Pittsburgh. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where church bells marked Sunday mornings and Friday night football games brought the whole town together. The folks in Shippingport were hard-working people, many of them connected to the coal and steel industries that had built western Pennsylvania. They understood energy. They understood power. What they did not yet understand was that their quiet riverside town was about to make history. On Labor Day 1954, something remarkable happened. President Eisenhower sat in a television studio in Denver, Colorado, holding what looked like a magic wand. It was actually a neutron wand connected to a counter. When he waved it, an electrical signal traveled 1,200 miles to Shippingport. Bulldozers roared to life. Earth moved. Construction began on the first full-scale commercial nuclear power plant in the world. Imagine being there that day, watching those first scoops of dirt being removed, knowing you were witnessing the birth of a new era. Construction was unlike anything America had seen before. This was not just another power plant. Engineers from Westinghouse worked alongside government scientists, designing systems that had never existed. Pressure vessels weighing 153 tons. Pumps that had to be assembled with jeweler precision. Cooling systems that moved water through a maze of pipes like blood through veins. Every component had to be perfect because this was nuclear energy, and perfect was the only acceptable standard. The men who built Shippingport became legends in their own right. They were welders and pipe fitters, electricians and concrete workers. They wore hard hats and carried lunch pails, just like their fathers had. But they also knew they were building something their fathers could never have imagined. They passed through airlock doors into sealed chambers. They welded pipes that would carry superheated water. They installed instruments that would monitor the splitting of atoms. On their lunch breaks, they talked about it with a mixture of pride and wonder. Do you think our grandkids will remember we built this? By 1957, Shippingport was ready. December 2nd, 4:30 in the morning. Most of America was still asleep, but in that control room along the Ohio River, engineers watched their instruments with steady hands and racing hearts. The reactor achieved criticality, a self-sustaining nuclear reaction. 16 days later, on December 18th, the first electricity flowed into the grid. Pittsburgh neighborhoods lit up with power generated by splitting atoms. No smoke, no coal dust, no oil fumes, just clean, incredible atomic energy. President Eisenhower returned to Shippingport in May 1958 for the official dedication. By then, the plant was operating at full capacity, generating 60 megawatts, enough to power thousands of homes. Eisenhower spoke of a future transformed, a future where nuclear plants would dot the landscape like filling stations, providing cheap electricity to every American community. The chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, Lewis Strauss, promised electricity too cheap to meter. Imagine that. Energy so abundant, so inexpensive, that utilities would not even bother billing you for individual kilowatt hours. It would be like air, like sunshine, just there, clean and endless. This was not wishful thinking. By the early 1960s, utilities across America were placing orders for nuclear plants. General Electric won a contract to build the Oyster Creek plant in New Jersey, competing directly against coal and winning on economic grounds alone. Between 1967 and 1974, American utilities ordered nearly 200 nuclear reactors. The Atomic Energy Commission predicted 1,000 nuclear plants would be operating in the United States by the year 2000. 1,000 clean energy facilities, eliminating the need for coal and oil in electricity generation. The future looked bright and smokeless. Families living near these new plants felt pride. They were not scared. Why would they be? These were symbols of progress, of American ingenuity. Kids on school field trips would visit nuclear facilities, pressing their faces against observation windows to watch the control rooms where their neighbors worked. Towns competed to host nuclear plants because they meant good jobs, stable tax revenue, and a piece of tomorrow. The atom was becoming a friend, just as the experts had promised. But something else was happening behind the scenes, something the families hanging laundry and the kids riding bikes could not see. The fossil fuel industry was watching. And they were worried, very worried. Put yourself in their shoes for a moment. You are an oil executive in 1959. You sit in a symposium hosted by the American Petroleum Institute. A nuclear physicist named Edward Teller stands at the podium. He is one of the fathers of the hydrogen bomb, a man who understands atoms better than almost anyone alive. And he tells you something terrifying. He tells you that burning fossil fuels is releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, that this carbon dioxide will trap heat, that ice caps will melt and seas will rise. He tells you this in 1959, decades before most Americans had ever heard the term climate change. You know what happens next? The oil industry does not pivot to cleaner energy. They do not invest in the nuclear future that Eisenhower promised. Instead, they decide to fight. They fight to protect their profits, their market share, their control over American energy. And they fight smart. By the early 1960s, something curious started happening. Environmental groups began forming, which was generally wonderful for America. The country needed people to care about clean air and water. But some of these groups received interesting funding. In 1969, an oilman named Robert Anderson, who owned Atlantic Richfield, gave $200,000 to start an organization called Friends of the Earth. In today's money, that would be over $1 million. The primary mission? Oppose nuclear energy. Think about that for a moment. An oil company funding an environmental group to fight against the cleanest large-scale energy source available. It would be like a tobacco company funding an anti-smoking campaign. Except it worked brilliantly. Throughout the 1960s and into the 70s, the anti-nuclear movement grew. Some people joined with genuine environmental concerns, which was understandable. Nuclear energy was new. Radioactive waste was real. Safety questions deserved serious consideration. But lurking behind many of these grassroots movements was fossil fuel money, amplifying fears, funding campaigns, making sure Americans stayed dependent on coal, oil, and natural gas. The coal industry formed the National Coal Policy Council in the 1960s, directly challenging federal programs designed to make nuclear energy economically competitive. When that became too obvious, the oil and gas industry took a subtler approach. They bought coal companies. They funded research that favored fossil fuels. They worked with environmental organizations, many filled with well-meaning people who had no idea where some of their funding originated. Remember those neighborhoods around Shippingport, where families felt proud to live near clean nuclear energy? By the 1970s, that pride was being replaced with fear. Not because anything had gone wrong at Shippingport. The plant operated safely for 25 years, generating over 7 billion kilowatt-hours of clean electricity. But because Americans were being told to be afraid, protest movements spread across the country. Some protests were genuine expressions of concern. Others were organized and funded by industries that had everything to lose if nuclear energy succeeded. The 1979 accident at 3 Mile Island, while serious, resulted in no deaths and minimal radiation release. But the psychological damage was immense. Media coverage was relentless. Americans watched their televisions in horror, imagining meltdowns and catastrophe. Never mind that coal plants were releasing actual radiation into the atmosphere every single day through their emissions. Never mind that air pollution from fossil fuels was killing thousands of Americans annually. The narrative shifted. Nuclear became scary. Fossil fuels remained familiar. By the 1980s, the dream was dying. Utilities canceled nuclear plant orders by the dozens. Environmental regulations tightened, which was necessary for safety, but also conveniently made nuclear plants far more expensive than they needed to be. The oil and gas industry breathed easier. Their dominance was secure. America would remain dependent on fossil fuels. The clean energy future that seemed so certain in 1957 was slipping away. Fast forward to the 2000s and 2010s. Guess who was fighting nuclear energy subsidies across America? The American Petroleum Institute, the same organization that Edward Teller warned back in 1959. They opposed efforts to keep existing nuclear plants running. They fought against new nuclear development. When mysterious grassroots groups called Citizens Against Nuclear Bailouts appeared in 16 states campaigning to shut down nuclear plants, investigators discovered the American Petroleum Institute was behind them. Meanwhile, the same industry promoted natural gas as clean energy. They called it a bridge fuel, a partner for renewables. What they did not mention was that methane, the primary component of natural gas, is 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. And it leaks. Throughout extraction, transportation, and use, methane escapes into our atmosphere. The bridge was a trap, keeping America dependent on fossil fuels while the planet continued warming. Here is what hurts the most. We had it. America had clean energy in our grasp 70 years ago. While families were buying their first color televisions and dancing to Chuck Berry, we were building the infrastructure for a fossil fuel-free future. Shippingport proved it worked. The technology was safe. The economics were promising. Engineers and scientists were ready to build hundreds of plants across the nation. The atom really could have been our friend. But the fossil fuel industry knew what nuclear energy represented. It represented their obsolescence. Imagine an America where electricity came from nuclear plants instead of coal and gas, where cities breathed clean air, where we did not pump carbon into the atmosphere, where energy independence was real because uranium is found in many countries, not concentrated in a handful of nations. That America was possible. That America was beginning to take shape in places like Shippingport. The people who lived through that era had no way of knowing what was being stolen from them. The families in Pittsburgh flipping light switches powered by atoms. The engineers at Shippingport, proud of their clean technology. The children growing up in the shadow of cooling towers, thinking this was what the future looked like. They believed in progress. They believed in American innovation. They had every reason to believe the promises were real. Today, we talk about climate change as if it is a recent discovery. We debate renewable energy as if it is a new concept. We act like clean power is some far-off dream requiring technologies we have not invented yet. But the truth is more painful. We almost had it. 70 years ago, the clean energy revolution was not a dream. It was happening. Real plants, real electricity, real progress. And it was derailed by an industry protecting its profits. The irony is almost too bitter to bear. The same fossil fuel executives who knew about climate change in 1959 spent the next 60 years funding climate denial. The same industry that saw nuclear energy as a competitive threat convinced environmentalists to oppose it. The same companies that profit from our addiction to oil and gas position themselves as partners in the clean energy transition while fighting it every step of the way. Shippingport operated until October 1982, 25 years of safe, clean energy production. When it was finally decommissioned between 1984 and 1989, the process was so successful that it became a model for the entire industry. The site was returned to greenfield condition. No lasting contamination, no danger to the community, just an empty space where history had been made. If you visit that site today, you will find another nuclear plant nearby. Beaver Valley. It is still generating clean electricity for Pennsylvania. Still proving that nuclear energy works. Still demonstrating what America gave up when we let fear and fossil fuel interests win. The engineers who built Shippingport are mostly gone now. The families who first lit their homes with atomic power have passed those houses to new generations. The children who grew up thinking nuclear energy was their future are grandparents, watching their grandchildren inherit a warming planet and wondering what went wrong. They remember the promise. They remember believing. What haunts me most is thinking about the America we could have built. The one where Eisenhower's vision came true, where 1,000 nuclear plants powered our communities cleanly and safely, where coal stayed in the ground, where oil remained for essential uses like plastics and chemicals not burned for electricity, where the air above our cities was clear, where climate change was a problem we never created because we chose atoms over carbon. That America existed in blueprints and hopes. It existed in the dedication of workers who built Shippingport. It existed in the speeches of a president who genuinely believed atomic energy could transform the world. It was real enough to touch. And then it faded, not because the technology failed, but because powerful interests made sure it would. The lights still glow in Pittsburgh tonight, though most no longer come from atoms splitting peacefully along the Ohio River. Shippingport is memory now, a ghost of what could have been. But maybe remembering is the first step toward reclaiming that stolen future. What stories do you carry about energy, about progress, about the promises that shaped your world? Leave a comment and let us know. Your memories matter. They remind us what we are fighting to get back.